So we've looked at how jQuery makes it really easy to select things on a page. So just to review, with JavaScript, with just plain JavaScript, you'd have to do document and then dot either get element by ID, and you'd have to put it inside like that. And remember, when you do get element by ID, you don't use the hashtag because this isn't a query selector, it's the actual ID name. So you just put the actual ID name in there. You could also do in JavaScript document dot get elements by class name. Okay, and so then we can only put classes in there. You couldn't put an ID in there and have it work. And then there's the more universal document dot query selector and query selector all. Both of those work. And that's where you can actually put in CSS selectors. So like the dot red text, that's a class name, or the pound sign or hashtag main heading. Okay, so that's where you can actually put those inside the string. Now, those are pretty verbose. We learned that jQuery makes that a lot easier and simpler just by putting a $sign, and you can drop in any kind of a CSS selector. You could put an H1 in there, and it'll grab all the H1s on the page. You can put a P in there, grab all the paragraphs in the page, and so on. So let's try something here. Now that we know how to select with jQuery, let's select anything that has this class para, okay, that we added. In this case, it's these two paragraph tags. So let's do that. Let's just grab anything with the class para, and you have to put the dot because we're talking about a class, and then para. Okay, so we've selected every paragraph, every element that has this class attribute with para in it. Now, let's say we want to add this class to these, elements that have para. With JavaScript, again, that's pretty verbose. We would have to do something like this. You'd have to say, okay, let's store these elements inside of something called, we'll just call them paragraphs, just a variable, and then we'd have to do our document.get element by class name. And then from there, we would have to go on and say, okay, now let's take those paragraphs, those variables we called paragraphs, and get their class names, and then set it to itself, and then add a new class, in this case red text, and we'd want to put a space in between. That's why we leave that space here, so that the word red text doesn't get jammed up against para. So we're just injecting this class into there. So that's how we do it with JavaScript. It's quite a few words and lines. Now with jQuery, check it out, it's a lot easier. We just simply do add class like that. And then we can just add whatever predefined classes we have in our CSS, like this one. And you don't put the dot here, you just put the class name. And now when I refresh, and let's lower the font size so it doesn't blow up the whole page. We'll just take it down to 50. If I refresh, you'll see there you go. Both paragraphs are in there, and they got these classes injected on them just by refreshing the page. And all we had to do was simply do this dot add class. So that's really cool. That's kind of just to demonstrate how shorthanded jQuery is compared to JavaScript. It really allows you to shorthand your code and write it, express a lot with just a little bit of code. And people fell in love with jQuery because of that. It's a very powerful language. So check it out. You can do remove class. And so like I said, I want you to start getting used to looking at documentation on the web. And jQuery is a great example of good documentation. You can kind of see how you can do things like add class. You can do CSS and things like that. You can add particular attributes and so on. The list goes on, and there's a lot of examples here where you can interact with it. So before we leave this topic, let's just do one more thing. We can actually style the CSS directly to all of these paragraph tags by doing something like this. CSS, and then what we do is we pass in the rule. So let's say, first let's refresh this. Save here, refresh. Okay, and we can say something like, let's make them all have a border, and then we'll say 1 pixel solid red. If I save that, There we go. Just refresh it, and you can simply do that by adding this .css. This is another jQuery feature. So that's affecting all of them. And really quick, if I just wanted to select the first one out of this array of paragraphs, you could simply add this with jQuery. And now we're only selecting the first one. And we'll affect it with whatever we add to the right of it with this dot notation. So you're starting to see you can chain these methods together, which is really cool in jQuery, and accomplish a lot with just a little bit of code.